Hey, you're listening to the Tales of a Gearhead podcast. This is brought to you by Cornwell Tools. I'm your host, Stacey David. And Cornwell Tools are the choice of professionals, but not just professionals. Also, for everybody that wants to do any kind of quality work with quality tools, better check out Cornwell. All right, let's get to it. The difference in the reality show vibe and the how-to vibe is completely different. And, you know, one of the reasons we did that, even when I was doing trucks, we were of course, the reality show thing hadn't even been created yet. I remember when the reality shows first came out, well, the first one was Monster Garage. And I remember people coming up, you know, saying, hey, you know, how are you going to compete with Jesse James, you know? I'm like, I'm not. I mean, he does a reality show. We do a how-to show. There's a big difference. Our focus is showing people how to do stuff and encouraging them to do it. Theirs is, you know, whatever it is, you know, whatever happens to be the problem of the day, you know, a deadline or not getting along with your crew or whatever. You know, the thing that always got me about that is all the shops I ever worked in, if there was that kind of dissension in that shop, it wasn't open very long. And you sure didn't want to take your vehicle there to have it worked on. You know, you wanted people that could work together. Now, it's important that people realize how often and how much work it takes to build a vehicle from the ground up. Like you were saying, you disassemble the vehicles 6, 7, 8 times. You put it together, you take it apart. You put it together, you take it apart. You fit this, you fit that. You know, you're always putting other things in there. One of the things that we like to show is the different steps that usually get overlooked. And the reason that's important is that tends to be the way that people approach the build of a vehicle. You know, it's all about, I'm going to drop this engine in, and I'm going to do this color paint job, and I'm going to slam in this cool leather interior, and I'm done. It's like, no, man, you hit the highlights. That was the demo reel, man. You know, the real work starts all between all that stuff. You know, I was talking with Jeff Schwartz one time from Schwartz Performance. Jeff's a great builder and does all kinds of great chassis and stuff. And we were laughing about, you know, when you get a vehicle back from paint, most people think that it's pretty much done. And it's like we both kind of figure that now I'm talking about you've done all your fab work and you've done all of your fitting work and you've done your paint and body work. And now it's just you're into your final assembly and details of everything. And that's about the halfway point if you're going to build a really nice vehicle in just hours. The amount of hours it takes for the first part as opposed to putting it together at the last part. And it's pretty close because there's so much time that goes into the plumbing and then goes into the interior, that goes into the, you know, just setting everything up and laying it out. And assembling and disassembling and getting the clutch in and making sure everything works right. So we try to encourage people to do that so they're planning accordingly. Because, man, I tell you what, if you don't do that, you can get so upside down in a project and so discouraged because it doesn't look like there's ever any end. You know, and I've seen that in people so many times. They'll come out and they'll talk about their project and they're like, man, I've had it apart and it didn't work right and I don't know what to do. And you just hear discouragement just dripping off them like they just got out of the shower. And the best thing you can do is just kind of go, okay, let's just start over here. Let's see what we really have to do, and let's just start knocking things out one at a time. You know, I heard a thing the other day, just recently, that was really eye-opening. They said that when JFK put the challenge out about us going to the moon by the end of the 60s, they said that there was approximately 2 million tasks that had to be completed for us to get to the moon and back. And 1 million of those tasks hadn't even been invented yet. And now you talk about a insurmountable mountain in front of you. If you look at that 2 million tasks, you just go home and say, I'm going to just go make a sandwich and watch a TV show. But they didn't. They went in there and they said, okay, what's task number 1? And they just started chipping away, identifying the problems and solving them. And pretty soon, 10 years later, roughly, we're on the moon. But you have to approach a project that same kind of way. You cannot look at the overall mass of what you're trying to do all at one time. It'll just overwhelm you. So you got to start digging through it, one step at a time. And you'll complete it. It'll take you a while, but that's just it. None of this stuff is quick because it's all skill and it's all time. And that's one thing, too, we were discussing just recently The unique thing about the mechanical world and building vehicles, this is not something that you can fake online. There's a lot of things that you can kind of learn to do online. I don't care how many videos you watch of a dude, TIG welding. You can't TIG weld until you pick one up and start doing it and learn to do it. You can't paint a vehicle by watching videos. You can have the ideas, you can talk the talk. But man, as soon as somebody puts a gun in your hand, you either can or you can't. And there's very few things like that. This is one of those deals where you can't fake it. And there's a certain amount of sweat equity that has to go into learning the skills and putting it together. But if you do that, man, it's worth it. And that's what we try to get across to people. It's like, man, once you step in and do something and you step back and look at it and go, I did that with my own two hands, even if it looks terrible, there's a sense of accomplishment. It's like, shut up. It looks great. I did it. I actually did that. And that is huge. If we could get more people to dig into that, you'd be surprised what it would do to the morale of the country. At least that's my 2 cents.
A lot of times I get plenty of the service emails come through me, and so I get to see what viewers are talking about and send them over to you, or sometimes I'm able to help them, oh, this happened in this episode, send them a clip and whatnot. I believe we had the chainsaw, the old chainsaw on a table during one of the Weiwo segments.
Yeah.
And this guy wrote in and said, I've been working on cars, trucks, all kinds of machinery my entire life. I'm about 85 now. I've got a very small garage. I don't have the room or the stamina to work on a big project anymore. And he said, what I've been doing for the past 10 or 15 years, it's all small engine. He rebuilds snapper mowers. He rebuilds go-karts, the riding mowers as well as the push mowers. And it got me thinking, because I know you and I have talked about this several times, about an entry-level project doesn't have to be a car or a truck or anything really that's expensive. It can be something that is manageable, small, has an engine, has a function, and you can tear it apart right there on a workbench. And you don't need a lift or anything like that. What are your thoughts on approaching, getting into it, like that? Because everybody wants to build the split window vet until they figure out how much time and how much money that's going to cost. But you could have just as much fun, if not maybe way more fun, rebuilding a snapper riding mower.
I'll tell you what, everybody tends to overlook, that's where we all started. We all started with little projects. We all started, it's one of the things, I was, sitting with Chip Foose a few years ago at SEMA, and we were laughing about that kind of thing because we all started with these little small projects, working on a lawnmower or a go-kart or a mini bike. I mean, we all started with go-karts and mini bikes or snowmobiles or something like that. And that is such a great entry-level project. And I tell you what, I still gravitate to those things. You know what? One of the most popular projects we ever did was that SureTrek. Was that 8-wheel drive off-road thing that had the snowmobile engine in it. For that exact reason. It's stuff that you can get into. You don't need a lot of specialized tools. You're learning, the basics of automotive, working on these things. There's a lot to be said in the fact that you don't boggle yourself and your garage down with a huge project. I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that we see when we go out. And Jonathan, you've seen it too. We go out and guys have these projects all over the place and they're like, I don't know what to do. And it's because they jumped into something that they just weren't prepared to do. Pulling apart an old mini bike or something like that is just a great, very fulfilling project. And man, we were just up at the auction the other day. These old Honda Trail 50s and these Trail 90s and mini bikes and stuff, man, these are bringing top dollar because we all remember them. We all remember thrashing them. How many people have tried to buy that motorcycle that we have sitting in the shop? Everybody, I want that bike. So I always encourage people, to start with the simple stuff, even if it's just building a model. I mean, you learn so much about the way that a chassis design and the way fit and finish of bodies and things working with a model. No, I love the small engine stuff. I talked to a buddy of mine the other day. We hadn't corresponded in, probably 5 years, and we just kind of got back together, and he sent me a picture of one of the projects he's got in his garage. Yeah, I don't know how the conversation went there, but it did. And in the back, I see an old snowmobile, like from the 70s, an old Skidoo Bombardier, And I'm like, hey, that's a cool project. What about the old snowmobile in the back? And he was like, I was going to build a go-kart out of it, like the one you had as a kid. And I was like, well, I'm looking at it because I want to build another one. It's just a great way to keep people involved in that. When people start building projects, they build something and it gets nicer. And it gets nicer. And then pretty soon they start entering the competitions and trying to win the car shows or trying to win the races, that everything gets so competitive that they forget to have fun. And I think that's kind of the magic of these simpler projects. You're not trying to win any shows. You're just trying to have fun. You're just trying to do something that you can really enjoy. That's the magic of the rat rod world. That's the magic of the vintage chopper world, or a guy, a motorcycle where they can bob it or they can chop it or they can do something, and they can do it in a weekend and still be able to get out and ride the vehicle. So I think it's great. I'm glad that the guy's working on that stuff.
All right, I've got a question for you guys. What is the most important tool in your garage? All right, I know you're thinking. Come on. All right, well, it's probably the one you use the most. And that would be your sockets, your ratchets, your screwdrivers, and your wrenches. And if you want quality tools there, you probably ought to check out somebody like Cornwell. Now, granted, you can get some cheaper tools. And honestly, there's a place for those ones that you want to bend up and heat and go into certain places, and those screwdrivers you don't mind screwing up. Well, that's where you get the cheap stuff. But if you want real quality tools that are going to last and have a warranty, that's where you need to check out somebody like Cornwell. They've been doing it forever, and believe me, you do get what you pay for.
All right, I've got a question here from Ben, and Ben is in the tool market, and he's looking for some tools, and he asks a question. He says, what does drop forged mean when I see it on a wrench, and is that important? Is it just the tool companies trying to be impressive? Yeah, definitely you want drop forged on your tools, and you want tools that have been drop forged. Basically what forging is, heating metal and hammering it into shape. Blacksmiths have been doing this for centuries. That's how you make metal stronger. That's how you make certain types of metal. And blacksmithing is the simplest form of forging. Now, basically, drop forged means that you have a die that is the shape of whatever you're trying to make, whether it's a hammer head or a hatchet head or whatever it is. And then modern manufacturers use a falling hammer or a powered hammer, and it comes down and it hammers that thing into that mold or that shape, and that is drop forging. Another way that you could make something like that is the casting process, where they just pour liquid metal into a mold and it's cast. Think of like a cast aluminum intake. And obviously, if you drop a cast aluminum intake on the ground, it's going to break. If you drop a forged piece on the ground, it's not going to break. The forging process, the more you hammer that metal, the tighter it makes the molecules, it stretches the grain, it aligns it, it does all kinds of stuff. So the forging process is very important to give you strong metal. There is press forging. Now, this is instead of forcing hot metal into a die with a hammer, it's just pressed into a die with hydraulic pressure. And this also adds more strength to the metal, although the forging process with a hammer seems to be the better way to go. There's roll forging. The hot metal is pressed between two rollers, and you shape it that way. And then there's cold forging, and this is where the metal is pressed into a die without heating it. So that's tremendous amount of pressure too. All of this is done to create alloys, or you just want to make your metal stronger. So if you are looking for tools, especially wrenches, yeah, you want them to say drop forged. If not, they're just going to bend on you when you go to cranking on those big bolts. So yes, find a quality tool maker and make sure that they are drop forged. Hope that helps, Ben. You know, that's one of the biggest things that we as car guys always think. We always have the best intentions of what we're going to do. We're like, you know, I'm going to take that. I'm going to drive it every day. It's going to be so cool. And then you do, and you try to drive it every day, and you realize, it might not have been the smartest thing to do. For example, years ago when I built the rat roaster, the little 32 Ford, I wanted to put a rumble seat in it because I always loved rumble seats. Our two daughters, you know, were growing up, and they were 5, 6 years old. And they were like, Daddy, the car with the rumble seat, we loved the rumble seat. And they would talk about the rumble seat all the time. I mean, they would draw pictures of it in their classes. You know, they didn't really know what it was. They just knew it was cool. It was a seat out in the back of the car in the middle of wide open spaces. So, you know, and we'd be going out to eat, and they'd be like, Daddy, when do we get to ride in the rumble seat? And they'd sing their little rumble seat song. We want to ride in the rumble seat. You know, this kind of thing. So my wife and I'd be laughing. So one day I decide, you know, I'm going to pick them up from school in that car and let them ride in the rumble seat. So I show up at the school, and they come out, and there's the car, and it's rumbly and loud, and all their friends are loving it. And I open up that rumble seat, and it's like this big party, and it's like, and they get in, and all their friends are envious and all this stuff. And we head down the road with them riding in the rumble seat. Now, if you've ever ridden in the back of a rumble seat of a car, you know, they were designed when cars went, 10, 15, 20 miles an hour, maybe? So we get out on the road, and I roll that thing up to about 50 miles an hour, and I look back there, and their hair is standing straight up and being wrapped in knots, and the exhaust is blowing on them because they're right back there by the side pipes, you know, and it's the sun is beating down on them, and we literally went about 2 miles, and they're like, Daddy, can we get out of the rumble seat? And they never rode in it again. So here I had a rumble seat that nobody ever used. Now, I take that back. We did use it when I had it in parades and things like that. Well, then, of course, everybody wanted to ride in it because you're just putting around, which is really what a rumble seat was for. But running down the road, no. So the best of intentions are not always the way that you're actually going to use the vehicle. So bear that in mind as you're coming up with these big plans. It's like, you know, I see me and our family with the dog driving out in this Jeep with all the top off all the time. And that may not happen that way. So make sure you're being realistic about how you're going to use your vehicles.
All right, that's it for today. Once again, we're brought to you by Cornwell Tools. Have a great day and get out there and work on something.